I make no claims to having a personal insight into the Home Office, but I'll tell you what I do know, and I'll tell you some of the problems I think we need to address over the coming weeks to push on this crack in the door. I think is going to be really important. And I say, like you said, if I'd stood here last year, I wouldn't have believed we'd have got this far in the year. I would have said maybe we'll get this far in 2 or 3, 4 years, maybe with a bit of luck. But I think it's been a brilliant campaign by lots of different people. They're carrying their own little expertise and the use of the media. It's been, if you look at it, it's been a brilliant media campaign actually. Because the Home Office would not have changed their mind about these things if it hadn't been for the media campaign, particularly around Charlotte Billy Caldwell and Alfie, at least the political opportunity to change the regulations. And when I did the licence with Alfie Dingley, I have to say his department were really, as this has been recorded, you're going to send it please to the Home Office, because I think the Home Office actually were really quite helpful about that licence. They were working in the dark, as we were working in the dark, and it took us 3 months to get all the information they required, and they kept changing the goalposts for Alfie, finally getting Alfie's licence, helped right over the line by Charlotte and Billy Caldwell, coming along at just the right moment, as though we coordinated the two campaigns. I've lost my track now, I've got all enthusiastic. So that happened, and then the Chief Medical Officer, Sally Davis, looked at the evidence and lo and behold said, I think the words were conclusive or substantial evidence for efficacy of cannabinoids or cannabis-derived medicinal products is the fancy word, for 4 indications: chronic pain, spasticity, mainly in the context of multiple sclerosis, but it should apply to any form of spasticity, nausea and vomiting, mainly again in the context of chemotherapy, and childhood epilepsy. And there's good evidence of that. It's sad that actually that evidence has been there for several years, and it was sold as though it was very recent evidence, and look, all this is now changed. It was there. If they looked at it 3 or 4 years prior to that, they would have found the same evidence. But ignoring that, that was the evidence, and she recommended that cannabis, or some products containing cannabis, carefully worded, should move from Schedule 1 of the Misuse of Drugs Regulations to Schedule 2. Which, for those that don't know, and I'm sure is actually very few people in this room, that would mean a doctor can prescribe it. It's the same category as morphine. So you can prescribe it. There are some restrictions, but basically a doctor can prescribe those products. That recommendation then went to the Advisory Committee on Misuse of Drugs, which is the official body that has to make those rescheduling recommendations to the Home Secretary. And they said, yes, we agree to an extent. It's all a little bit wrapped up. But they said, yes, we agree that we should look at these products carefully and reschedule some of them into Schedule 2. And then it gets a bit murky, because then the Home Secretary said, yes, we're going to do that, we're going to do it by the autumn, and 4 bodies are now looking at it. And if you look at government, different departments tend not to talk to each other that effectively, and at the moment, the Home Office is dealing with it, the Advisory Council on Misuse of Drugs is dealing with it, which reports to the Home Secretary. The Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, forget the title right, the MHRA is dealing with it, and the Department of Health is dealing with it. And all those bodies have got to coordinate themselves, and I would like to think they're going to ask for expert advice. But what they haven't done is announce any timetable and any way of seeking that advice. I happen to know that some groups and bodies have been invited to talk to these people, but not on any official capacity as far as I can understand. I don't know if you know anything else, say so. I was asked to go and talk to the Home Office last Wednesday, and 1 stop away on the tube from Westminster, they cancelled the meeting. And I think some emergency came up, and that may be perfectly genuine. I'm trying to get back in next week. But at the moment, there's a little bit of silence, a little bit of mystery about what's happening, and whether they're actually asking people who know what they're talking about. And that's both the users and the groups that represent the users, such as the UPA, and such as they are very few, but cannabis medical experts or whatever. We don't know who they're asking. So I hope, let's say by Christmas, that the regulations will be sensible. Let's hope. There's no reason to think there won't be, but equally there's no reason to think there wouldn't be either at the moment, because we just don't know. I have 4 concerns, which I'll go through with you. Feel free to chip in, by the way. One is the definition of this cannabis-derived medicinal product. What is that? Worst case scenario, they'll define it as the pharmaceutical product Epidiolex. That's the worst case scenario, because that's a nice pharmaceutical product that's gone through the medicines regulatory process like any other pharmaceutical drug and approved as a medicine in the States now. The FDA in the States has approved it as a medicine. It's done everything right in terms of pharmaceuticals. And as had previously their drug side effects. I don't now agree with the way GW Pharma is developing things, but in fairness to them, 10 years ago they were well ahead of the game. They produced a cannabis medicine and got it licensed and played the game through the pharmaceutical route. So you know, I try to be nice to everybody. Congratulations for that. I don't agree with the way they're going now, but that's a different matter. But that's a worst case scenario, because Epidiolex may be partly helpful for some children with childhood epilepsies. I don't doubt that. Nothing wrong with the product, and that's who it will help. I don't think it will help even those children as well as they could be helped by addition of a little bit of THC. That's certainly the case with Billy Corpel and Alfie Dingley and Sophia Gibson, that's publicly knowledge. And all the other children, most of the children respond to a little bit of THC. And of course it doesn't help all the other conditions that cannabis is known to assist to any significant degree, particularly chronic pain, spasticity, and nausea and vomiting, and all the other indications, fibromyalgia and what have you. So it will hardly even be a step forward if they do that. It will be a mini step forward to approve Epidiolex. But I seriously hope that's not going to happen, and actually I don't think it will happen. I think they are obliged now to approve, well, let's call it full extract cannabis products with all the other minor cannabinoids and terpenes in it. In a sense, they've done that already, because they've approved Bedrocan products and Tilray products for those children. And if you think about it, they cannot politically backtrack and say, well, we're not going to allow any other child, let alone adult, to have those products at all, and that, are we going to take it away from those children? No, that would be political suicide. I can't think that's going to happen. And I do think that they will have to approve the full extract cannabis products. I accept entirely that they've got to have some sort of quality assurance, because there's a lot of products out there. Some are really good, some are full of old rubbish, and we know that. And there's lots of manufacturers, growers around this country and abroad that produce pretty tatty product. So there's got to be, it's the government after all, it's got to have some sort of quality assurance. And the only one I can come up with, and I don't think anyone else can come up with, is what's called good manufacturing practice, GMP. I'm no great expert at that, and it gets very boring very quickly. But basically, with GMP, you guarantee the quality, you guarantee that product, you know what's in the product, you know where it's come from, you can guarantee its quality, and it should be the same batch to batch. And after all, we all want a product, in the end, that we know that we buy it one week, it's going to be the same stuff in the bottle, or whatever, the next week. So I accept that. Personally, I think good quality assurance from GMP standard is reasonable. And that should allow a lot of the products around into the country, particularly from Canada. There's a little bit of a downside, without getting too complicated. They don't have that standard in Canada. They work to a different standard, GPP. And I hope there'll be some sort of grace period to allow those manufacturers or growers around to change their standard to this GMP one. Otherwise, it's going to be very restricted to just 2 or 3 cultivators and growers in the short term at least. So I hope that's what will happen. The big question is, what format will they be in? My gut feeling, and again I have no insight into this, is that they will allow only oils and capsules in the first instance. I don't think they'll allow flour and therefore allow vaping, let alone smoke. Smoking will not be medically allowed. That is 100% definite. They pretty well said that. But vaping, my gut feeling is it won't be allowable as a medicinal product. I don't know, but that's my feeling. Why is that? Well, again, the people thinking about these things have a sort of medicinal pharmaceutical mind, if you like. And the doctor has a doctor's mind, and they like saying, right, I want you to take 20 milligrams of CBD or 200 milligrams of CBD 3 times a day. Here's a prescription. And they don't like saying, take a gram of dried flour and vape it, because it doesn't feel right, let alone edibles. You know, I can't see the doctor down the road saying take 3 cookies with this amount in 4 times a day. I'd like to see that, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're way off that. Yeah.
Don't you think now, you know, as the government 3 months ago still weren't admitting that it was medical, we should now allow them to dictate the way that we medicate with cannabis, you know? Don't you think,
well, I agree with that,
as a community, we should be standing strong and saying, well, no, you're not dictating. The right to grow, I think, is very important.
I agree with him.
Not to have this taken out of our hands.
Yes. What I'm doing is I'm trying to give you my view of what they're likely to say. And I think they're because they've got a pharmaceutical mind, they don't like a plant being a drug, a medicine, and they're going to try and medicalise it as much as possible, is my view. Now you could, probably everyone in this room disagrees with that, but I think that's what's going in the short term. And we've got to remember, once we see that in the short term, and people aren't going mad on the streets in great numbers, then maybe the regulations will ease over the coming years.
I was just going to ask Mike, because I've just put something on the screen. This was a Freedom of Information request from the states of Jersey, who are about a few weeks ahead of us, I think, in their processing, and they've got a list of products up there that they're about to reschedule, and that might give us a clue as to what's coming.
Yes, and that's Bedrocan and Tilray, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which are fine, nothing wrong with those products, but there are others out there, and they're the ones happen to comply with GMP standard. But there are others that comply to GMP and others that could comply with GMP quite quickly. So what exactly is allowed, we don't know. But my guess is it will be full extract, which is good, only oils and capsules in the first instance, and not flour, and definitely not edibles, and absolutely definitely not smoking. That's my view. Do you agree with that? Don't agree with it in principle. Do you agree that's likely to happen? Yeah. Okay. Second concern I have is exceptional need. There's been a little bit of backtracking from the government, and they said at first they didn't really, the wording was not really restrictive, but they've now said that only people with exceptional need for these indications, I'll come to what indications in a moment, will be allowed to have it prescribed. And some of the doctors have said, well, you haven't tried, to children for example, we haven't tried every epilepsy thing in the book, so you can't have cannabis. There's 21 anticonvulsant drugs in the British National Formulary. And if the implication is you've got to have tried all 21 before you can try cannabis. Likewise, analgesics, I haven't added those up. There's an awful lot of analgesics, including opioids, which are dangerous, as we know. Have you got to try all of those before you can try cannabis? Is it really going to be interpreted as a medicine of last resort? It might be. My gut feeling again is it probably won't, because I think they'd be really pushing it to say you've got to have tried all 21 anticonvulsant drugs before you can try cannabis. So I hope that that's interpreted as, I don't think they're going to say, we'll let you use cannabis whenever you like. I think they're going to say at first that you can use cannabis when you've tried reasonably tried other reasonable products, or some such governmental political wording like that. So a doctor said, well, you've maybe got to try 4 or 5 anticonvulsants before you can try cannabis. I don't agree with that, but nevertheless I think, again, that's what they're likely to do. So it won't be a first choice, but it hopefully won't be a last choice. Hopefully it'll be a sort of reasonable choice of quite a long way down the road, which is sad, but probably can happen.
Do you know whether they need to, or whether they will attempt to justify some of these decisions? And so what I was thinking is, if you had a list of analgesics, presumably they would all come with potential side effects.
They all do.
And if you did a scientific method to say how dangerous this is, cannabis would most likely score quite well. versus these other drugs, and that would be a rationale
Yes.
for acting in a certain way.
Yes.
Can we maybe push them to provide a rationale for these things?
I'd like to think yes, because when it's convenient, they go along the lines of evidence-based medicine.
Yes.
Like you should only use Epidiolex for children with epilepsy, because anyone's been through our standard clinical trials, yet they ignore other evidence when convenient, like THC. We can't prescribe, the doctors say you can't prescribe THC for children with epilepsy because it's going to cause them cognitive damage in the long term, for which there is absolutely no evidence at all. None. Not a shred of evidence. There's a little bit of evidence that says high THC recreational use might, only might, cause some long-term cognitive damage in some people. There are other studies that totally refute that, but that's a bit iffy. But that's high THC, low CBD products on the street, and you don't know quite what you're getting. Those studies have shown that. So a high CBD, low THC product, there's no evidence at all that it damages children's developing brains. Yet they conveniently say, we're not going to do it because of that, ignoring evidence to the contrary, but saying there's evidence for Epidiolex. So they're having their cake and eating it. So I would like to think you're right. Let's produce some evidence that says, okay, it's reasonable to try 1 or 2 or 3 of the initial opioids or whatever. I don't agree with opioids at all, but let's look at the evidence that says cannabis is actually safer than a lot of these products. Yeah.
I know this might be like missing the point completely, but I just want to put forward a small life hack into skipping through some of the medical trials of epilepsy meds. And actually, out of the hundreds that are out there, only 2 have come back as being a vegan-friendly option. So if you just want to try a couple, you just go vegan and then
Make a note of that.
Good point. If you tell us which are the vegan-friendly options, then
Yeah.
it's very useful.
You should talk to your epilepsy nurse.
That's right, I didn't know that. Thank you. So, exceptional needs, my third worry is what conditions will they allow? That's a big concern, and I think they cannot, now the Chief Medical Officer, having said those 4 things I mentioned earlier, start again, childhood epilepsy, nausea and vomiting, chronic pain, and spasticity, they can't surely back out of approving those as being conditions that are allowable to be prescribed for. They then said there is some evidence for a lot of other things, like fibromyalgia, and they've said there's no evidence for other things like cancer. So my guess is that they will license it for those 4 and probably require some sort of clinical trial program for the other indications, because again they're thinking pharmaceutical. I don't agree. Don't shoot the messenger with this. It's not my idea. Yeah.
Proof that cannabis kills cancer.
Yes.
Since 1970.
Yes. There's very good evidence. I mean, definitive evidence in, and sorry to say, animal models. And there's also a lot of anecdotal evidence and case studies from people who've experienced it. I know that.
Compassion clubs that take
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the. I quite agree.
Do you think, I mean, obviously we're always looking for ways, effective ways of being able to challenge what we see as being, you know, that not very clever restrictions such as that. And obviously, do you think it's reasonable argument to make that the entire decision about what cannabis will be useful for should be left entirely between the doctor and the patient? Is that an argument you think it's possible to win? Or
Yes, it's one in many, roughly 40% of the world jurisdictions that have allowed cannabis to be prescribed have sensibly gone on the line, if your doctor thinks it may be useful for you, you can prescribe it, full stop. And I think that's perfectly reasonable.
yes,
I mean, it's up to you and the doctor. You need a knowledgeable doctor then, because you don't want the doctor to say, well, it doesn't work, but actually it does. So there is a downside to that as well, but I'm personally very against a list. A hierarchical list. My gut feeling is they will produce a hierarchical
are there any
list.
other drugs for which a list like that is produced?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
So they would reasonably have to justify why there needs to be a list for this
There
one?
would be, yes, yes.
Okay.
There is a justification for requiring people to have a prescription to go into a clinical trial program.
Yeah.
That happens in many of the new cancer drugs, which obviously by the nature of the thing come out very early in their studies because they might help people, but those people who prescribe it have to enter into a study. It's not unreasonable if it's just to see how you're doing. And also the multiple sclerosis disease modifying drugs, when they came out 7-8 years ago, they were also, because they were quite expensive, there's a different reason, they said we can prescribe those as long as you enter the people with MS into a clinical study. So they might do that for those less evidence-based indications below the top 4. I'm a little more relaxed about that because when you think about it, a lot of people with a lot of conditions take fibromyalgia. They might say there's not enough evidence prescribing fibromyalgia, but people with fibromyalgia have pain. And people with fibromyalgia often have spasticity. And people with fibromyalgia often feel sick. They don't have epilepsy. But those 3 rings. So all of a sudden, if you wanted to interpret those regulations sensibly, I don't mean get around the regulations, interpret them sensibly. A lot of the things that we might want to use it for, and cancer is the obvious other example, people with cancer sadly get pain, they often get spasticity, they can also get epilepsy, so there may be, and spasticity, they get all 4 of those things, so there may be a good reason to prescribe it for people with cancer, with fibromyalgia, and a lot of other things, even if they only allow those 4 conditions. If you think about it. There's a lot of people in Canada, for example, young men have now, there's a big epidemic now of low back pain in young males in Canada before it becomes legal or recreationally. It's dreadful back pain. I think I need some cannabis for it. So there are ways around these things, but my gut feeling is they cannot get round approving it for those 4 conditions. What they do for the rest down the list, I don't know. I think there'll be some clinical trial suggestion, if not requirement. Who knows? But there are 3 concerning things. I think the biggest concern, I have to say quite clearly, is the ignorance of doctors. And just as an example, I'm associated with lots of organisations. I always say yes to everything. But one of those I'm associated with is End Our Pain. And they are in touch with 16 families, I think is the number. And of those families, 14 of their medical teams have refused to make the application to the panel. 2 applications to the panel, that's all. And I think the panel has only approved 2. Is that right?
Yeah, 3. Well, no, it's 2, but they keep reporting 3 because there's 3 children in receipt. But one of them wasn't through the panel.
Alfie wasn't through the panel, so I think there's 2 approved. 1 definitely not approved, Hilmarie Brown,
yes,
last week for ridiculous reasons.
Yes.
So in a sense, we can't blame the panel because they haven't had many applications. They've got, if you look at it superficially, they've got a 2/3 acceptance rate at the moment.
No,
2 out of 3.
We're specifically tracking a dozen, and
Yeah.
so far not a single one has managed to get to the panel yet.
No. So in a sense, we can't blame the dear old panel because they haven't had anything to reject yet. So I think a biggest issue, if the government went wild tomorrow and allowed everything you could think of, from edibles and vaping and for all conditions you like, we wouldn't get it because the doctors wouldn't prescribe it. And in Germany, where it has been allowed for a couple of years now, even longer, 2% of doctors now prescribe for cannabis. 2%. 98% don't want it. Now that's a real worry. And some of those, I don't disagree with the doctor saying, well, you know, I would like to support you, I just don't understand about cannabis. I've never used it. I don't know what dose I would prescribe. I don't know anything about it. Therefore, I can't do it. That's not unreasonable. You would want your doctor to know what he's writing on his form to take to boots, wouldn't you, really? But my concern is that there's a lot of other ignorance out there of people saying the wrong thing and talking complete nonsense, including people like the Association of British Paediatric Neurologists, who've come up with a complete nonsense statement out of total ignorance. And you can record that and send it to them if you like.
I have, I will.
You have? Okay, I'll tone it down from now on. And that is a real concern. And my concern again for the regulations is, will they're backtracking from any doctor to specialist clinicians. And that worries me in the sense that to take children again, are they going to say that for a child with epilepsy, it's only a paediatric neurologist who can prescribe? Or for cancer, it's only a cancer specialist who can prescribe? Or etc., etc., etc. superficially you think, well, that's all right, because they're the guys that know all about childhood epilepsy, all about cancer, all about Crohn's disease, or whatever it is. But it's not all right, because the vast majority of that specialist group knows nothing about cannabis, and therefore won't prescribe it. And we know that for certain now because of those children with epilepsy. Let alone all the other. I don't think the panel's even received a single application for any condition out with epilepsy, as far as I know. So what we must do is train the doctors. I think that's the overriding priority, more important than anything else. So to do that, two things I want to mention is I'm forming, I hope, a society. This was written in some magazine called Vice, which I'd never heard of. Sorry to say I hadn't heard of it. Apparently it's quite cool to be in Vice, so yeah, it's good. I'm at last trendy. It's taken me 65 years to get to a degree of trendiness. They were a little bit premature. I chat to the journalists, and I still don't learn. I chat to journalists, it gets in print. I should know better. I mentioned to them we were thinking of doing this, and it was printed that it was all happening, and it was etc. etc. It is happening, but it hasn't happened yet. But doctors are sad creatures. They like societies. They like clubs. So I thought, well, we'll form them a club, and we're going to call it, we haven't got a name yet because we haven't met yet, but tentatively it's something like the Medical Cannabis Collision Society, something like that.
Not the Anslinger Centre?
That's another question. I'll come back to that one. That was a fascinating power of social media, that was. And that's for doctors, initially. Personally, I like to see it broadened out to other groups. But I think at first there's political power in it just being for the doctors. I don't agree with it, but again, I'm a pragmatist in political terms. I think that would be sensible. Hopefully, that's on the 5th of November in Piccadilly. And we're advertising it in all the various medical things. And I hope we'll get some people turn up, more than 6 that have already signed up. May not be many more than 6. You never know. I'd like to see 20 or 30 or 40. I'd like to see 150 or whatever doctors turn up to join the society. So then at least we begin to know which are the good doctors, the friendly doctors who know or want to know about cannabis, and then can be able to prescribe it. Then of course you've got to allow the government has got to say, well, those who are interested in cannabis or have been trained in cannabis can prescribe it, and not only those specialists in those conditions. Going back to the childhood epilepsy thing again, what we'd like to do is get a few paediatric neurologists trained in cannabis medicine, but if there's none come forward, we'd like at least a few cannabis specialists to be allowed to prescribe for those children, all very well holding the hand of the paediatric neurologist at the same time. Now whether that happens or not, I hope seriously it will. But of course, as all very well forming a nice society, it doesn't train the doctors, so at the same time we're trying to set up a teaching program, and the filming is next week for that. We're going to do 12 modules of about 15-20 minutes each module. Pretty basic stuff. You lot would know all about it anyway. But starting at the basics, what the plant is, what THC is, what CBD is, what the ratio means, all the other cannabinoids, how you take it, what the dosage are, as far as we know, what the conditions, what's the evidence for conditions, all that stuff. And about 12 modules of about 15-20 minutes each. Free. No one's making money from it. One of these days I will learn the lesson, but I do need to make money from these things. But I haven't quite got there yet. So it's going to be free, because we thought we didn't want it to be a commercial venture from one company. We didn't want it to be the GW Pharma teaching program or the Bedrocan teaching program, whatever it is. We wanted it to be open and free. So that will be online, and it'll be a sort of variety of different, it'll be videos and graphics and animations and things like that.
Yeah, a cheeky question.
Yes.
Where's the cannabis expertise coming from?
Mainly me, but with others.
Would you like some help?
Yeah, I can't, strangely enough, even my ego, I have to admit that I don't know everything about cannabis.
We do. We do.
Exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, I can't do it. I can do the doctor's bit, and I think there's strength in a doctor doing the doctor's bit,
definitely.
because they'll believe, you know, heaven say, having a patient tell the doctor, well, good Lord, above that won't do at all. But yeah, I think having other people involved, like a grower, it's not going to be a big part of the teaching programme. I mean, the doctors don't know how to grow the stuff, but at least a little bit of knowledge about it would be useful. So I think that's very helpful. And that should be, we'll come back about that. It's going to happen. I hope it will happen fairly soon, but it needs a lot of planning. It was to be called, that's a great story, the Anslinger Institute. For those who don't know, I suppose anyone left who doesn't know now, is the big demon in 30s, I think it was 1930s?
Late 20s.
20s, 30s,
yeah.
in the States. It's a lovely story. Well, it's not a lovely story, it was an interesting story, called, what's his name, Fred? Harry, thank you very much. Harry Anslinger was the director of the Federal Narcotics Agency. Is that right, the name? He was, that's it. I think basically the story goes that he was in competition with the FBI director. God, what was the FBI director called? Come on. He was the FBI director, famous. Hoover, thank you. And wanted more Hoover was hoovering up the money, and Anslinger wanted some money for his department. So he thought, I'm going to have a big campaign. Let's think of what we can demonise to make everyone realise it's awful and we need money into it, is marijuana. Let's have a big anti-marijuana, anti-cannabis thing. And he was very successful at that, in fairness. He did that job very well. He was demonised. There was those films produced, Reefer Madness and all those things came out at the time. It causes all sorts of problems, and it was racist as well. It was particularly anti-Mexican and anti-black.
Complete war on racism, not on cannabis.
It was an appalling thing.
Yeah.
So we thought, ironically, we would call the teaching thing Anslinger Institute as a sort of slap in the face of Anslinger. I didn't think of that, but actually I warmed to it.
That's quite bad. Yeah,
I quite liked it, but a lot of people on social media told us otherwise. The power of social media. So for those who didn't agree with naming a teaching institute after a racist anti-cannabis guy, for some reason I don't understand, it is being changed. Don't know to what yet, but it's being changed. There you go, power of social media. Anslinger is not going to be forever remembered. Good. So we need teaching for doctors, we need something for doctors, and then hopefully we'll get at least a small core of doctors who know what they're talking about and are able to prescribe it. And then of course we need the government to enable those doctors to be part of the prescribing team. I think I'm going to shut up at that point. And there's a lot there, there's a lot we don't know, so we've got that crack in the door. We need to push on it. Hopefully it will open wide by Christmas. My gut feeling says it won't open wide, it will open a little bit more than it is at the moment, and we've still got quite a long way to go to get everything that we want sorted out. But we have come an awful long way in 12 months, and I think that's, that's due not to the government. They've responded to pressure from a lot of different groups and a lot of different people. So congratulations to everybody involved, including, of course, the UPAAGM. Thank you.